Okay, and we should be live. So good morning and welcome. So today we're going to be talking about implementing MBSE and specifically defining the reason. So this sort of dovetails with the last couple of talks that we've done. And just before we get going, then the usual protocol. So mute your microphones, raise any questions via chat, and somebody will pick it up and get back to you. The video will be available afterwards, as will the slides with any hand-drawn annotations on them. And as usual, you can get access to the Scarecrow's knob and the MBSE Embassy YouTube channel, where we'll be posting all these videos for people to look at. So we're going to be looking, as I said, this is the third in this sort of mini-series of deploying MBSE. And we're going to be looking at how we do MBSE successfully. So previously, we've looked at understanding the capability and also understanding the maturity of your MBSE. And today we're going to be looking at defining the reason. So just as by way of a recap, so as we all know, this is the MBSE mantra. So for successful model-based systems engineering, obviously we need to have people, process and tools. And as we always say, because we're systems engineers, we don't just think about the things, the people, process and tools. Very importantly, we also think about the relationships between them. And we know it's very important that the people, by which we mean competent people with the right skills to do the right job, actually have the skills necessary to enable the process. Again, by process, we mean the overall approach. We can have the best approach in the world, and without the suitably competent people, it's worth nothing. And likewise, we can have the best people in the world, and without an underlying approach, it means nothing. And as usual, we need to make sure that our overall approach drives the tool and not the other way around. We need to make sure that our approach is the master and our tool is the slave. So when we talk about deploying MBSE, these are the three questions. So previously, we've looked at this one: what's your current MBSE situation, or what's your current maturity? Your current capability and your current maturity. Today, we're going to be looking at why do you want MBSE? And the main point of these last few talks has been really answering these questions using MBSE. For a true MBSE approach in place, you should be using MBSE for everything. It shouldn't just be about modeling and creating some diagrams. You should be applying MBSE to your overall approach, to your strategy, and so on. So we looked last week about using something like Ravens. This is an example as one of the techniques we could use to help determine our capability here. So here we've got MBSE in a slide, which many of you will be familiar with. And we saw a live demo last week from Simon's dining room table of how to construct a Ravens model of what your current capability is, and then how to use that to identify the areas that you're strong in, the areas you're not so strong in, and hence any gaps that you might have. We also looked at how we could use that to help to inform our evolution. Okay, and again, this is very important. What stage are we at in our MBSE evolution? Where are we beginning? Where do we want to go to? And how do we get from one stage to another? Okay. So we're going to be looking at the third of those questions today, which is why do you want MBSE? Okay. There's many techniques we can use to identify that. We've spoken about context modeling. We did that a few weeks ago. There is a video available on context modeling, so I won't dwell on that in too much detail. And of course, you can use a text-based approach if you want to, a structured text-based approach, which many people do. Obviously, we prefer a more MBSE approach, something like context modeling. And when we do context modeling, in our case, we're using SysML, we're using the systems modeling language to help us to visualize those models, those contextual models, and that's crucial to everything that we do. And what the context will allow us to do is a number of different things. It will allow us to understand which stakeholders have an interest in what it is we're trying to do. It will allow us to identify why they want to do that and what the benefits are, what it is they're setting out to achieve. Okay, so these are some of the questions that we need to address. What we're going to talk about today is this is great if you're, for example, if you've already got experience of MBSE, and more importantly, if the people that you're dealing with also have a good experience and a good working knowledge of MBSE, because doing something like a use case diagram isn't going to frighten those people off. However, we very often put in the situation where the people we're actually dealing with, the stakeholders that we're actually dealing with, are not systems engineers, and they might not have any experience in MBSE, and more to the point, they might be intimidated by things like MBSE, and certainly by things like SysML. So using mechanisms like this, using techniques like this, might not be suitable at all times, because it does depend on who your target audience is. So really, what we're going to look at today at a very high level is how we actually go about doing this. How can we apply MBSE without people realizing it? And we're going to talk about one of the MBSE by stealth techniques that we use, and it's a thing called TeamStorming. So again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on it. I really want to emphasize the MBSE behind it. So let's have a look at what we're going to look at. So again, this week and the previous 2 weeks, this forms the heart of what we call the Trinity approach. What's the capability, what's the maturity, and what's the reason behind it? And again, in Cozy UK, we'll be publishing a book on this later in the year. But today we're going to talk about MBSE by stealth. And what we mean by that is actually applying MBSE and getting people to use MBSE, but without them realizing it. And this is really important, and it's a very powerful thing to be able to do. TeamStorming is just one of the ways that you can do that, and it won't surprise you to know that we have published a book on this, and it's something that we use extensively, and it's something that we use all the time. TeamStorming is very good because it allows you to do things like brainstorming and team building exercises, but actually what you've got is a proper systems thinking approach underneath this. What we've actually got is a proper MBSE approach under this. So TeamStorming is like the friendly face of MBSE in this case. As we've said, the target audience for this is non-systems engineers and non-experts, for example. And the big advantage of it is it needs no formal training in any specific notation or modeling language. It doesn't require any specific tools apart from some post-it notes and so on. And very importantly, people don't realize that we're doing MBSE, and that's, we really can't emphasize that enough. So basically, the way it works is TeamStorming, we have a number of what we call games. These are all based on very well-established educational type games. When we came up with this many years ago, Simon and I spent many weeks poring over all the existing, very well-proven educational games that you can play with a specific aim in mind. So we took the ones that were suitable for what we wanted to do. We tailored them to make sure that they actually did what we wanted them to do. And then we constructed an underlying model that would sort of unify all of these different games and make sure they're all consistent with one another. One of the problems that we found that we've had, both of us having gone through many team building exercises and brainstorming sessions, is it's all well and good. You can create all this great information, but it's actually worth nothing if you don't do something with that information. So that's very important. So one of the things that it gives us is a proper output mechanism. So typically a TeamStorming session will have groups of between 12 and 40 people. Having said that, I personally have worked in ones with over 60 people, sort of 60 or 70 people, because you are broken down into smaller groups anyway. We've also worked on smaller groups. So, for example, we do use this internally within Scarecrow when we're coming up with different ideas. Anybody that went to our extravaganza, when was that? Last year? Last February. I've lost a year somewhere along the line. Anyone that came to our extravaganza last February, the idea behind that, the concept of it and the planning of it and the execution of it, that was all based on the TeamStorming session. So it is something that we use in anger. Basically, what you have to do, you have to start off with a question. In our case, with what we're doing now in terms of deploying MBSE, that question is very well defined. The question is basically, why do we want to employ MBSE in our business? Okay. However, you can ask any number of different questions. So it's things like, what future products and markets do we have? How do we improve on the way that we do things? How do we implement a new methodology or a specific technique? How do we transition to a new work activity? So you can see these last two, these are quite common. these actually feed into what we're talking about today. A word of caution, however, and Simon and I have both seen this, I'm sure that Simon will comment on this as well. We've also had people ask things like, what's the answer to life, the universe and everything? And as we all know, if you ask that question, the answer you get is 42. So the answer you get out of TeamStorming is only as good as the question that you ask. So the more vague that you make that question, the more vague the output will become. And that's something we've got to be a little bit wary of. So Simon, have you got anything to say on that point?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. And the issue is you get a vague answer, which, you know, may some people then find the vague answer unsatisfactory, but you've asked a vague question. So what do you expect? So that setting the question is is absolutely key to the whole thing, John, isn't it? If you don't get this right, the whole TeamStorming session can be, not as useful as perhaps it can. So
yeah, that's it. And you're right. You can't get a good answer if you've got a poorly formed or poorly understood question in the first place. Okay, so again, so the first thing that we do, is we ask the question. In our case, when we're talking about deploying MBSE, it's a lot easier because we're talking about these bottom two really, and the question that we're asking is, how do we go about deploying MBSE into our organisation? So let's have a little look at what we might come up with. So I'm going to just very quickly whip through the games and show you what the output is. I'm not going to dwell too much on the content of them. So I just want to show you what some of the output looks like. And I want to relate it back. If people remember MBSE in the slide, what we're really doing here, if you think back to the right-hand side of the diagram, where we've got the visualization, all we're really doing with TeamStorming is changing the visualization of our MBSE approach. And we're changing it to be friendly, we're changing it to be sketches rather than any formal notation. And rather than using any case tools or anything fancy like that, we're just using pen and paper, we're using Post-it notes and so on. So the idea is we play a series of these different games. So the first game that we'll play, and then there's about 7 or 8 of these games, and you can do them. We do a thing called TeamStorming Lite as well, and that's when you've only got a few hours to do it, so we can strip down the number of games. So basically, what we do in the first game, they've all got hilarious names as well, as you can imagine. So the first game is called X Factors, and the goal is to identify a number of factors or anything really that relates to the chosen question. And all we do, we just get everybody together. We give everybody a group of cards, so to write things on, or Post-it notes or whatever. And basically, each individual has a stack of about 5 cards. We do sometimes limit the numbers. If we've got a large number of people in the room, we will limit the numbers. If we've only got 12 or 15 people, we'll give them 10 cards. If we've got 60 people, we'll give them 3 cards each, for example. And people write down what they think are the crucial factors that relate back to the question. So all the things that we do from this point forward all relate back to the original question. Okay, so the question you can think of as our original sort of why, or our original, what is it we're setting out to achieve? And these factors can be things like stakeholders, there could be activities that need to be carried out, there might be risks or whatever. And we end up with something that looks a lot like this. And if you can't make that out, that's essentially, it's a table with lots and lots of Post-its and cards put on it. And you end up with a jumbled mess, essentially, that looks like this, of tables and cards. And then what we do, we have the next game, which is called To Affinity and Beyond. And we group these factors together as what we know as what we call affinities. And all an affinity is a logical grouping of these factors that might be based on the similar activities, or there might be groups of stakeholders, or they might be related to a different aspect of the business. It really doesn't matter, but they just need to be grouped in some way. And this will change depending on the nature of the question that's being asked, and also the nature of the organisation that we're working in. So the idea is we group these factors into what we call affinities, and then we do a thing called a dot vote. And a dot vote is basically, we give people a number of stickers and we say, which do you think are the most important? Go and put a sticker on the ones that you think are important. And we'll typically give each person 3 of these little, literally just a little circle sticker, and they go and stick those on the affinities that they think are relevant. So here we can see we've taken all of the factors from before, we group them together into affinities. So we've got an affinity here called kids, schools, teachers. We've got one called ambassador. We've got funding, marketing, governance, events, and so on and so on. We've got another set of affinities here, things like best practice, happy staff, personalities, happy clients, promotion, and so on. These little dots you can see in the corners, these are the dot votes. Now, the reason that we do the dot voting is that in a typical TeamStorming session, you'll be looking at a day or 2 days. You really don't have time to cover everything that we have on here in a single session. So what we want to do is to prioritize them. And dot voting is just a very simple way to prioritize what do we think are the most important affinities. You might be able to make out that the dots are actually different colors as well. So some of them are like a pale grey, but in reality, obviously, these are sort of green, yellow, blue, or whatever they're going to be. So we identify these different affinities. And then based on these affinities, we play a game called empathy. Empathy, everybody's got it, empathy, as the old adage goes. And we do this as a team exercise. And the idea is we identify one of the characters. So again, you should already be starting to see the MBSE come out of this and what's lying beneath it. So essentially what we're generating here is the, if you like, pass number 1 of our ontology, okay? These are literally post-it notes with things drawn between them and just words on the lines. But because they're post-it notes and because they're just words drawn on the line, we've never had a single person not understand what this is, because it's friendly, because it's post-it notes, and because they wrote the words themselves. If we did this in a block diagram, which you can imagine would be very easy, because essentially that's what we've done, people wouldn't understand it. They'd be scared, they'd be intimidating. So just the fact that we're using post-it notes is a really important point there. Post-it notes, marker pens, little stickers, people love stickers. But essentially what we're doing, we're building up pass number 1 of the ontology that we're going to be using. So when it comes to empathy, we identify, we say draw a character. It's basically, it's a stakeholder. We're doing stakeholder identification. So again, if you've got MBSE experience, you'll start to see the MBSE that lies beneath this and the way it's coming out. And we basically say, right, choose a character and define what we call the empathies for that. So essentially we say, if that character, if you achieve your goal, if you answered your question successfully, so in this case, we've got a school kid, and examples of that are schools and teachers. Here, we've got an example of client and happy clients in particular. We encourage them to draw pictures. As you can see, some people's art is better than other people's art. That one's rather terrifying. That one's quite nice. And we say, if everything went well, what would this character be hearing? What would they be seeing? What would they be saying? And what would they be feeling? So this is what we call an empathy map. So in this case, what would we be seeing? We'd be seeing branding. We'd be seeing kids engaging and inspired and so on. Kids challenging their parents, changes in problem-solving approaches. So this was, as you can imagine, this was like a STEM type activity. What you can start to see here, again in MBSE terms, is the context start to come out. We're looking at something from a specific point of view. It's a context. We're saying, what is it that they would like to see? What would they like to achieve? So you can imagine these being use cases, for example, of their needs. What is it they want to achieve? The same over here. So feeling here, we've got confident, value for money, happy, valued, respected, and so on. So really, as I say, what we're really building up here is a context. We then play a game called Morning Glory, which if you're of my generation, you'll immediately think of an Oasis album. If you're not of my generation, you might be thinking about something quite different. The idea is with Morning Glory, it's what's the story, Morning Glory. We take the empathy map and we ask the question, what's the story, in the form of a storyboard. And basically we say, here's the empathy map. To achieve at least one of these, how would you go about it? If everything went well, what would happen? What would be the sequence of events that would happen in order for us to achieve that? So already you can start to see where I'm going with this. The sequence of events for that. If this is my context and this is a very high level representation of use cases, and then me saying, what's the sequence of events? We're going to go into scenarios. But again, rather than using something like SysML, rather than using sequence diagrams or parametric diagrams or anything like that, we're going to be putting a friendly face on it. So in this case, we take the child, or we take the client, and we look at some storyboards for them. Again, we don't call them scenarios, we call them storyboards in this case. So this is what it might look like. So we start off here. Here's a kid who says, this is boring. They ring the Ontology hotline. A handsome chap answers. They go and put on some sort of a show or whatever, or presentation for the kids. The kids say, this is great, this is fun. There's somebody teaching it there. And at the end of it, the kids are coming out saying, actually, what can we do with this? What can we build from this? So we start off with, this is the situation we're in at the moment. This is boring. This is where we want to get to. The kids saying, great, this is fun. We want to do more with it. They're becoming engaged and so on. And this is a typical storyboard that might happen to get us to that situation. So that's one type of sequence that we might see there, a simple sequence of events. Another one we can see here, and again, you can see the difference in the artwork and here, is more of a dialogue. So we've got the client on one side, we've got a problem, and then this is kind of basically like in Cozy, I think, on the right-hand side. We can help, we arrange a meeting, this is the problem, why don't you do some training? We get some training provision put on there, we review, we have a review form that says everybody loves it, the clients say that was great, let's do it again. So again, scenarios can be more of a dialogue, like we're seeing on the right-hand side here. We've got some supporting text there as well. We can help, we've improved things, the future's good, we learn, we feel confident. These are the empathies that we're seeing from the empathy map that people have written on the side. All we're trying to encourage people to do here is just to think out loud and just say, look, sunny day, if everything went fine, what would happen? And it's very important what we're doing here is a sunny day scenario, okay, where everything works. We're going to break it in a moment using some of the subsequent games. But again, the key point here is anybody can draw these, even if you've got no drawing skills at all, like this team on the right. It doesn't matter. We're just doing very, very simple things. Anybody with a modeling background, if you've got a UML background, for example, you'll recognize this as essentially, and again, we haven't guided people towards this, it's essentially a communication diagram. The thing on the right-hand side, if you've got any UML or SysML experience, it's essentially a sequence diagram. But again, we haven't guided people to do that. They've naturally come up with this kind of a storyline. If you say to people, just come up with like a sequence of events or actions that might happen, they will naturally do something like that, or they will naturally do something like that. But the main thing here is it doesn't look like MBSE, it doesn't look like SysML, but people are doing it, people are being creative, and we're achieving a consensus with what they're coming up with there. Okay, so that's what we call morning glory. It's scenario modeling. Okay. What we then do, bearing in mind these are sunny day scenarios, these are happy scenarios, we then break this. We have a thing called animal magic. And with animal magic, what we do, we split each team into two sub-teams, two smaller teams, and we assign one as the solution people, so the beavers who beaver away, and we assign the other team as the monkeys who come up with the monkey wrenches, the problems that are going to do. We give each one a set of cards or post-it notes, and we say, right, go away, and the beaver team come up with proactive things that we could be doing, key enablers, enabling actions that would make sure that we could achieve this. The monkey team, on the other hand, we say, right, go away and come up with a series of actions that are really going to mess things up, that are going to make this fail, okay, all the way through. So you've got one team coming up with enablers, and you've got another team coming up with disruptors, effectively. And this is a great exercise because it really you really get to see who's truly evil in each of the teams as well, by the people who desperately want to be monkeys rather than the people who desperately want to be beavers. And the idea is, it's quite simple. We come up with a list of these things. So here we've got things like lead a STEM session. That's a positive thing. Engage through social media. What you can also see here, though, are some monkey wrenches. The kids are fighting. There's too many tweets. More positive things, incentivize the kids, and so on. And again, we can see things on here, thank attendees, obtain feedback. These are positive actions, these are enabling actions, but we can also see disruptors on here. What about if you get poor feedback? What about if there's no resources? Okay, so all these sorts of things are what we're trying to get people to do. What we then do is we take these actions, we take these enablers and these disruptors, and we play what's called showdown. This is perhaps in terms of engaging with people, and getting people involved and actually just having fun as well. This is a really, really powerful game, because essentially what we do, we go through the scenario that we had before, we go through the storyboard that we had before. So this one, for example, and at each point, the facilitator will say, right, this is boring, what happens? And then each of the teams, the monkeys and the beavers, get a chance to play one of their cards to either enable that or to disrupt it. So we go through step by step our scenario, and we play these cards against one another, and it does become a bit of a showdown. So here you can see where, you know, there's a lot of cards being played at this point. Start point, this is boring. As soon as they ring the Incozy hotline, it says things like, there's nobody there, nobody picks up the phone. The person who picks up the phone is rude or doesn't know what they're doing or is incompetent or whatever. So we have this series of different enabling and disruption actions as we go through the scenario, as we can see here. And the same over here. We've actually drawn on very crude, not a great expression, very crude beavers onto these cards that we're putting on here. And these are the disruptive actions, what might happen if things go wrong. And the ones that are more post-it notes, the beavers are the enabling actions. The ones at the post-it notes, obviously this team thought they could draw beavers, didn't feel quite so confident about drawing monkeys. So the ones at the post-it notes, you can see there, they're on the wrong course and things like that. They're the disruptors. But the idea is you go through the storyboard, you go through the scenario, and you play these disruptors, you play the enabling actions. And what this then allows you to do at the end is come up with a list of, well, actually, what are the key enabling actions that we need to have in place? So it will allow you to prioritize your existing enabling actions, your existing beaver actions that you got there. But also, very importantly, what will almost always happen is that some disruptors will be played, and there was no mitigating beaver action. There was no enabling action that could mitigate against that disruptor. So what that helps you to do is identify missing actions. That is to identify things that you hadn't thought of in the first place, that you do actually need to have in place in order to make the thing work. And this is really what we're trying to do with this storyboard modeling. Is, you know, the goal is we want to know what are the key things that we need to have in place, what are the key enablers, and so on. But to do this, we can't just think about the positive. What do we need to make things run smoothly? We can't just consider the sunny day scenarios. We really have to consider the rainy day scenarios, what happens when things go wrong. And that's where a lot of the power comes out in this. We can put it all together now with what we call a big picture. So here you can see our start point. So this is, you know, we start off with the question. Okay, then we go into, well, what are the factors? We group these into affinities. So in modeling terms, this is like our ontology. Okay, we then say, okay, what are the who are the key characters, and we create empathy maps. Okay, so again, stakeholder analysis, contextual analysis is essentially what we're doing there. We then identify some storyboards. So what we're really doing there is sunny day scenarios, okay? Taking some of the things from here and creating sunny day scenarios. And then we're identifying enabling factors and disruptors. This will then allow us to do various rainy day scenarios and do a very, very powerful scenario analysis. And this is quite a natural flow. This is just one flow that we're showing here. There are other things we can do as well. But for the purposes of what we're setting out to do in terms of what are you hoping to achieve in terms of your MBSE deployment, you know, this is, so we get all sorts of factors that come out there. This is key because this will give us the high level ontology for your business. This is key because it identifies the relevant stakeholders. And also, what does success look like? That's what we're trying to capture there. What does success look like? If you employ MBSE successfully in your business, what does it look like from the different points of view? What are the, and this will help us identify things like measurements, key performance indicators, and so on. These are our success criteria we're starting to see there. What have we got to do in order to make sure our implementation of MBSE is successful? So we look through these various different scenarios that we can do. These are the things that we need to consider. Okay, well, what actions will we need to put in place? These are some of the actions we need to put in place. What can go wrong? This is what can go wrong. So this allows us to identify, you know, positive steps, positive actions that will go into our strategy. We then play through the different scenarios. How do we make sure that that we can deploy successful MBSE, even when we got things that can go wrong? Okay, and basically we use all of this stuff now to help us answer the question, why do we want to do MBSE in the first place? What does success look like? How are we going to measure it? That's what we're really trying to get out of this. And applying something like TeamStorming, MBSE by Stealth, is a very powerful way to do that. Again, just to recap why, because we can use it with non-systems engineers. We're dealing with people, when we go into an organization, even when you get senior management, they kind of get it and they know and they're bought into it and they say, yes, we definitely want this. But we've got to convince the other stakeholders. Even the senior managers probably don't have the technical knowledge. You can't go in using things like SysML. You can't say, let's do some context and some scenarios. So it's aimed at non-systems engineers and non-technical people. Also, very importantly, it's good fun. It's very engaging. It's a good laugh. Everybody has a good time. People, the barriers come down. People start to engage with one another. You start to achieve a consensus. It's a very powerful way to get people who don't necessarily work together normally to at least meet up and talk to one another. And of course, the thing that makes all this work is I've realised, here's a great dyslexia typo for you there. We have an underling model, okay? So that's something that somebody who works for you might produce. I think that might supposed to say underlying model. So let's have a look at what this looks like. This is the TeamStorming life cycle. So we have stages in there. We've got a number of TeamStorming stages, and for each stage we execute a number of processes. So when we talk about these games that we have here, so TeamStorming, it describes the evolution of a TeamStorming session. Okay, we have a number of these games. Each game has a goal associated with it. It's got a number of rules by which you apply. It's got an approach. So for example, is it a team game? Is it an individual game? And so on. There's a number of steps involved in that approach. These are the steps that you go through to play the game. And we generate a number of artifacts. So these are going to be post-it notes with things written on them. Are they going to be the big diagrams? Whatever they're going to be. And each game has a number of resources with them. And the resources will literally be bring some cards, bring some post-it notes, have some flip charts, that kind of thing. Very importantly, we have this idea of facilitators involved and also participants. Participants form teams, and the teams form the overall group. Okay, so this gives us our, if you like, the ontology for how we run the team storming session. So this is what we call the team storming life cycle. What you need to be careful of is the team storming session will only be as good as the stakeholders that you got involved in it. And so what we do, we identify these are the key stakeholders, and obviously we can then go on to say, and these are the skills that they need, these are the competencies that they need. So we've got this idea of a stakeholder, our classic customer, external, supplier split. Stakeholders have an interest in the system. We've got the sponsor, obviously. You need the person that's organising this, that's ideally paying for this. We've got the participants that are going to ultimately be broken down into beavers and monkeys for some of the later games. We've got the best practice. Again, everything that we do, everything in TeamStorming maps back to international standards, maps back to established educationally proven games that we're playing. On the supplier side, we've got the facilitator. Very importantly, you need two. You can't do this with one person. You can't facilitate this with one person. You need the lead facilitator. You need the support facilitator. And again, the roles, the skills, that these different roles have are very different. The lead facilitator obviously needs to understand TeamStorming and, very importantly, needs MBSE knowledge to make this work properly. The support facilitator, however, doesn't. The support facilitator, in its simplest form, can just be there to help out, to help with the logistics and so on, to help with the pens and paper and that sort of thing, to take photographs. So when we run one of these sessions every year at our INCOSE UK Annual Systems Engineering Conference, we have a thing called the Systems Summit. When I run that, I'm the lead facilitator, and we have somebody from the secretariat who isn't a systems engineer providing the support role, and that's perfectly good. We've done this with large groups where we've had 5 or 6 support facilitators and 1 lead facilitator. So the makeup of how many people do these is going to depend on the nature of the session. These people need to be aware of TeamStorming and just aware of the game, so it's more of an awareness level of competence whereas obviously the lead facilitator needs more skills, and also needs good people skills as well in order to get on with people. So this is part of the underlying model. What we also see is this is our ontology, if you like. So we've got this idea of factors, and you can see different roles coming out there: storyboards, affinities, empathies, different actions. So we've got solution actions, monkey wrench actions, outstanding actions. So these are enablers. See, these are disruptors that disrupt the storyboards, and we've got outstanding actions that counteract the monkey wrenches. There's a few other things on there that we haven't covered, such as the car park and so on. But essentially, this is part of the model that underlies everything that we do in TeamStorming. And so really the point about what I'm talking about today is not so much this is for you to learn how to do TeamStorming. The main point here is it enables us to do this MBSE by stealth. And this is a very, very powerful thing to be able to do. You can use TeamStorming, you can use whatever technique you want to. The point here is you need to get people together, you need to get them thinking about things, and you can't scare them off using things like SysML. If you're in that situation, we do something like TeamStorming, but the advantage we have with TeamStorming is it's got this full ontology and model beneath it, which means that we can go very easily from what we have here, a collection of post-it notes and different diagrams and so on, and things stuck all over them, taking photographs of all those things. Because we've got this underlying approach, because we know all the different stakeholders, because we've got the ontology, because we've got all the processes defined, we know exactly how to go from that into what we would recognize more easily as an MBSE model. So we can apply the SysML, we can do the more formal modeling and apply it to them.
John, we've got a question from Filippo on the chat.
Okay.
Where can I read more on this MBSE by stealth and TeamStorming? Is there a book published or a paper? Thanks a lot.
Right. Well, thank you, Filippo. He wins the. He gets £5 now for asking that question. Yes, I will tell you exactly where you can get that from. So TeamStorming helps inform our MBSE strategy. So remember, the last couple of weeks we spoke about capability and evolution. It's the reason we've been talking about today. Where could you possibly learn more about this? This is the book here. It's a book called TeamStorming. It's available from Ontology UK. So if you go to the Ontology UK website and click on, I don't know, shop or whatever it is, I don't know what it is, that's where you can buy it. It comes. There's two. The reason there's two books there is there's the participants guide. That's the one you give out to the people who are obviously taking part in the thing. It's a very slim volume. It basically just describes the games, each step in the games, and gives you examples of what the outputs might look like. And then there's the facilitators guide, and that's what, 200 pages, something like that size. It's a lot thicker, and it's got all the ins and outs of all the modelling. It defines all the processes. It defines all the skills that you need. It defines how to cope with it. And also there's a lot of subtleties involved in running these sessions as well, down to, I'll give you an example of this, is when you're creating these post-it notes, for example, and you want people to write things on, we give them big, thick marker pens. And the reason we do this is you're limited to how much you can write on the post-its. When we started doing this, we found out very quickly if people use biros, they will write an essay on every post-it note, and you don't want that. You just want a couple of words. So there's a lot of subtleties built into it as well. Sorry, Si?
Or 0.5 mil lead pencils.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, so that's all. That's all in the TeamStorming guides there. So as I said, available from Ontology UK.
There's another question coming from. Does the book also explain how to transition to SysML?
Yes, it does. So it gives you everything. It's got all the MBSE models beneath it, and it gives you examples of basically how to go from the sketches into, and again, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but correct me if I get this wrong or miss anything outside. It's going into things like stakeholder views using block diagrams, context models using use cases, scenarios using sequence diagrams, and all those sorts of things, isn't it? I think they're the main
Yeah, I'm just looking at the facilitator's guide's about 100 pages and the participants' guide's about 25 pages.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I'm
it goes
just
into
having
all
a
the
flick
detail on
through
how to
the,
create the models for that.
yeah. Yeah, so it's got examples of like activity diagrams and
Of course, because yeah, all the processes are defined, aren't they? And
yeah, but
yeah, so
also how to do storyboards using activity diagrams as well. It's got storyboards as sequence diagrams, storyboards as activity diagrams with swim lanes, mapping, capturing your empathies as use case diagrams, doing your affinity maps as block definition diagrams.
And also, when
so
you buy the when you buy TeamStorming, you buy them as a pair, don't you? And you get one of the facilitators guide, and you get.
I can't remember how it works. I can't remember how it works.
Something like that, isn't it?
Think,
so basically, you get a bunch of participants' guides to give out to the participant, and then you get one facilitator's guide. But there we go. Okay. Any more questions, Si, on the chat? Or?
No, that's it. I can't see any more. No.
Okay. And while you're there, why not pick up a copy of Think Engineer and Don't Panic and get in your pre-order for Trinity?
If only one of the authors would finish their part of the book.
Yeah. Well, if only the reviewers would actually review it and give us the green light.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
So further information, the slides, and I don't think there were many things hand-drawn on this, so probably just the slides will be available. The video for this will be available. You get access to the Scarecrow's knob as well. Don't forget our MBSE Embassy YouTube channel. All the previous videos have been on this. I think this is like number 7 or 8 or something today, Si. Just gives you an idea of how long we've all been in lockdown. Yeah. Don't forget, every Friday, System LNRE, it will be on tomorrow. It wasn't on last week because we had a bank holiday. A well-deserved day at home for everybody. So System LNRE is every Friday. Please do follow us on LinkedIn and join us. In terms of the things that we've got coming up over the next few weeks, we've got our training courses next week, MBSE. After that, the interfaces one. Of course, these events every Thursday, the free event. We've got the MBSE social event coming up after our tea break. Si, are you going to be running that?
Possibly.
Okay.
I could do some.
So, we'll both be there for that anyway. And so again, get in contact with whatever you want. So in that case, guys, thank you very much for joining us. Please join us in 15 minutes for the MBSE social event, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.